Sekeres and Price from Wall Center and a presentation of Audi downtown Vancouver. We have an in-studio guest here at the Go-Goat Sports Studio from West Vancouver. Welcome home, Peter Galindo. You came all the way from Toronto to see a soccer match not be played on Sunday.
Yeah, I just came here for a press conference in the end. It seems like it. At least there will be one game played, though, in the end.
Matt, Peter, it's better than coming all the way from Panama.
This is true. They had a very good training session at UBC, but it is a long way to come. Peter working with Sportsnet MLS and covering the Canadian men's national team. All right, Peter, you've done a lot of reporting on this. Are we going to have a game tomorrow at BC Place in Nations League?
We are, which really up until a couple of days ago, that was in limbo. And they only returned to training on Monday afternoon. So there was still a lot of uncertainty regarding whether they were even going to return to the pitch, whether there was any progress made in talks, which it doesn't seem like there was. The players did say that there are a lot of unanswered questions that are still left to be answered, of course. And Nick Bontis flew out of Vancouver, I believe it was late Monday morning, maybe Monday mid-morning, after having 2 face-to-face meetings, after making a whole bunch of hoopla about how they are meeting face-to-face and how they're always available, and then he flies out Monday morning. Now, there are conflicting reasons as to why he flew out. Some are saying that apparently there were threats made to his family and to his home in Hamilton. Others are saying that he just had a schedule to maintain because he is a professor at McMaster, so he does have another job to manage on top of that. But luckily, it looks like there is going to be a game, although the damage in terms of potential fan turnout seems to already be done, even with a ticket discount.
And we were getting all sorts of messages yesterday, Peter, that the Canada Soccer had been offering different kinds of discounts and rebates to. Do you know anything on that for the folks who are trying to get to this game tomorrow or want to get to this game tomorrow?
It's very convoluted right now. It seems like there's a buy one, get one, and then there's a 75% discount, although there are some who have bought those tickets at full price already. So there's a lot of confusion regarding that because some are saying, well, if I bought it at full price and you are now giving discounts, whatever the discount is, shouldn't we be entitled to a bit of a rebate here? And I understand why they're giving the discounts because clearly this has been a PR nightmare, so they have to do whatever they can to make the fans happy, but I think the damage has already been done.
It's, well, welcome to the flight industry. First of all, you're never paying the same as the person beside you on a flight. There are players that do want to play and probably wanted to play versus Panama. They do want to put on a bit of a show. Probably Davies coming home for the first time in a long time. Fans should probably, if they're fans of Alphonso Davies and all, I mean, do they have to park their pride and just say, okay, I'm going to go to the game anyway? Is it, I suppose the scruples of the individual fan is going to come into play here. But ultimately, it's your chance to see this team that has been an author of a great story. You wonder if they're ultimately going to just swallow the pride and show up anyway here for this match.
Yeah, some fans, I think, are doing that. At the end of the day, they're coming at this from the perspective of, this is our national team. No matter what happens, we support our team, the players, the coaches who got us this far. Even though this has been a big mess, we should still support them when there's a game on. We want the best for them. But then there are other fans who are now disillusioned, and fair enough, because this has been a bit of a mess. And there are newer fans who got on board, some were aware of Canada Soccer's history with just disorganization, let's call it. And were then willing to give this team a chance when they saw the run they went on, when they saw just how likable a lot of these players were, how awesome their stories were, just in terms of how they got to this point. And it really just depends on what your perspective is on this whole thing. And that's why I'm really intrigued to see how many people turn up on Thursday, because that's going to be a real sense of not so much the overall support, but just, I guess, where the majority of the fans stand on this whole thing. Because at the end of the day, labor negotiations, guys, I mean, you guys know this, having seen NHL negotiations, MLB negotiations, the fans don't have a lot of sympathy for either side in these things.
Well, they generally, I would say, have more sympathy towards players. They'll side with millionaires over billionaires. But that's not the dynamic in this case. You know, they have their day jobs. That's where they get their millions from in the case of a Davies and stuff. So it's a little bit of a different power dynamic, though I've found personally, just surveying social media, that people have fallen into the old narratives of I'm just going to support the players, not really understanding this is a different, nuanced story, isn't it?
It's millionaires versus volunteers. We've come to learn.
No, it's true. And then
which should change. We'll get into that in a sec.
Yeah, fair enough. And there are some players too who are making, now this is still very good money for the average person, but if you're looking at guys in MLS, there are guys making somewhere in the $150,000 to $200,000 range, which compared to
the Dane St. Clairs are making $275,000, and he's fighting for a starting job at times.
Exactly. And I mean, whatever their cut is, whether that works out to being $50,000 a player, $60,000 a player, for someone like Alphonso Davies, who makes about 5 million euros a year, I believe that's gross, but regardless, still a lot of money and very good money. It doesn't make much of a difference to him in terms of whether that's 60 or 50 or 70, but for most of these MLS players, maybe outside of your Lucas Cavallinis, that's still going to have a major impact. That's life-changing money at the end of the day. So, of course, they're going to be fighting for every penny they can get, and rightfully so, because they were the laborers who got this team into this position.
We have a coach of the men's national team who makes a tidy dollar on the after-dinner speaking tour, speaking about leadership. We haven't heard from Coach Herdman yet, but you think that's about to change. This is a CONCACAF game, so there will be some obligations.
Yeah.
What are you hearing about Coach Herdman, who's kind of stuck in the middle here?
Yeah, I've been talking to other colleagues of mine, and we were wondering, just because the last couple of training sessions involving the players, they weren't speaking to the media. So a lot of us just didn't bother to turn up, because otherwise, unless you're there to capture B-roll and footage and whatnot, there's really no reason to go, maybe just to see who's there, who's injured, whatnot. But today's training session, Wednesday's training session, because it's the day before the game, typically when it's an official match, the coaches do have to speak before the game. That is a regulation for
day of
CONCACAF. Exactly. So that is why we're kind of wondering if he does speak, and it seems like he might. And if he does, what sort of answers he gives, because he seems to be very much caught in the middle here and has, obviously both parties to leverage.
The fact that, Herdman is well paid, as Matt says, but a lot of the governing body is not. Many people think that should change here going forward. If Canada's going to join the elite group of soccer nations, and by elite we mean top 40, should they have a paid president? Should that be Nick Bontis's focus going forward, rather than being a professor at McMaster in addition to his duties here? And of course, where does that money come from ultimately? And do the players make that equation that, we can have a full-time paid presidency, but it's going to cost money?
That it is. And this is where I think this whole dispute comes from, but both in the short term and the long term. Because I'll use the U.S. as an example. They have tens of millions of dollars coming in every year, and the FIFA money that they bring in is a pretty small percentage of that, whether that's 10, 15, 20 million dollars that they bring in from World Cup appearances, not counting 2018, of course.
But they're also maximizing those dollars. Like when the women win the World Cup, they're getting a lot of cheese there.
Exactly. Sponsorships and whatnot. So the players in their new CBA, they are entitled to 90% of the FIFA prize pool. And it's split evenly now between the men and the women dollars-wise, which was a landmark agreement.
Best on the planet.
Yeah, exactly. And now a couple other European nations are negotiating similar deals for themselves. And the Canadian players, not in terms of dollars and cents, but just how it's structured, they're looking for similar deals now and in the future. So they will be entitled during the 2026 cycle to bonus money during qualifying games. And I think the U.S. players at this point in time are guaranteed to get a baseline of about $24,000 for every qualifying game they play in. That's the men. And that money typically comes from lots of different revenue streams, broadcasting, corporate sponsors, the like. And why this has become so contentious is the CSB signing that Media Pro deal, because there's no real transparency as to where that money is going and how it's being divvied up. Because I would imagine, and this is just sort of a paraphrasing maybe how the talks went, because I feel like the windfalls, they'll eventually be worked out. They're not too far apart based on, the information that's out there. They will probably ultimately come to an agreement in that regard. It's more so what happens in the future when they're trying to get more money now that they realize that there is extra revenue to bring in. And even from 2020 to 2021, guys, the CSA did see a 52% increase. Now, that's largely because they played games in 2021. They didn't in 2020. They sold out Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton, which I think that generated something like $8 million in gate revenues or something like that, which is incredible money for the Federation, which led to them being able to charter flights, which they haven't always done before. They're now flying business class, which again has been a pretty big rarity over the last few years. All these little things are adding up. So they're probably looking at all of this and realizing, well, if there's more money coming in, we deserve a bigger slice of the pie.
And don't dispute that in the least. I've always been acutely aware on this show that the labor is the product when it comes to pro sports. How do you think the players have handled themselves, Peter?
It's very difficult to say, because I feel like up until the Panama game was canceled, they very much had the entire public support from the looks of it. Now, Twitter is a very small sample size, of course, but once that Panama game got canceled, there were more people who seemed to be really going against the players. Now, it wasn't, the public support was still very much in favor of the players, but there were extra people saying, well, I traveled from Campbell River, from Port Alberni, from Alberta, from out east to watch this game. I took time out of my weekend. I spent lots of money to be able to watch this. And we're now stuck in the middle in these labor talks. And yes, the players apologize, the Federation apologized, but what does that really mean, right? At the end of the day, it's just words. And I mean, what else can they really do, I suppose, in that situation? But the fans are still, I think, a little bit conflicted, because they understand, certainly the educated fans, the informed fans, the hardcore fans, they are very well aware of where both sides are coming from. But then there is that, and I think we all feel this way as sports fans sometimes. It's like, well, what about me at the end of the day? I'm the consumer. I'm the one who pays my hard-earned money to watch this team, and in a way kind of helps fund the Federation in a lot of ways, because also taxpayer dollars and whatnot from the government. What about me and whatnot? And that's understandable. So, I feel like the public, I would say it's still overwhelmingly positive for the players in terms of how they handled this, but the Panama cancellation did hurt them a little bit.
Well, I mean, the show must go on, right? When you cross that bridge and say, no, our show isn't going on, you're going to make some enemies.
The casual fan, I think, has been hurt.
Well, and I think
the diehard is
so.
okay, but but how many times do we see in our inbox, guys, I was finally buying into this team, buying into this sport, and I feel hurt by this. Yeah.
Because they had done such a great job in collecting the casual fan and support here through this World Cup qualifying window. The next pressure point is when?
That's probably going to be after the Curacao game, as they look ahead to Honduras and have to travel down there. Will the players go down there? Will they, once again try to make things difficult? Will the Federation, answer their pleas? Because they apparently have scheduled extra talks for the rest of the week and in the future. So we'll see how that goes. But that's going to be the real big question is, will they go to San Pedro Sula? Will they play that Honduras game? And then also after that, sort of as we look ahead to September and what's going to be the last window to play matches ahead of the World Cup, what kind of opponents are they going to get? Are they going to travel to Europe? Is this going to drag into September? I mean, if it does, then Lord help everybody.
Yes.
Let's be clear on that fall window. they're not playing at BC Place. They're going to play on grass, and they're probably going to have to play. If they play a home match at all, I would guess it's in Toronto, on grass with the less travel for a lot of these teams, right? Or is it 2 away matches? Do they have to travel for both of them?
So this is what's interesting. I have been hearing rumblings around the CSA that they were speaking to a high-profile national team about actually playing at BC Place in September.
Really?
Yes, because extra revenue. If they got the big boy to come here,
right.
They could stomach the appearance fee costs, the cut of the ticket prices,
and the
things
turf?
like that. The turf apparently wasn't a deterrent.
Really?
It wasn't a deterrent. Yeah, even for this window, that wasn't really the issue. The issue was the financial side of things in terms of paying, and I'm just throwing names out there, but let's say Uruguay had come here.
Yeah.
They would have asked for a pretty big slice of the pie, too much for the CSA to stomach and justify as a pretty big cost. So that was really more so the issue, which I was surprised by because I, like you, Blake, I thought it was going to be the turf that was going to sway a lot of these guys, but no, apparently the federations were fine with it. Maybe if the players were okay with it, that's a different story. But yeah, that was apparently the rumor that was out there was they were speaking to one, possibly two high profile nations about coming to Vancouver in September. And then I believe it was either go to Europe, then come to Vancouver, or vice versa.
Well, you're right. And it's counterintuitive in some regards, but it's two matches for the price of one. I mean,
Right.
at BMO Field, what are you getting 27? In permanent seating without putting up temporary seating, you're getting 27. You could sell out. I mean, I'm going to throw a name out there too because I'm just speaking out of my ass here. But
I'm daydreaming about names. Actually,
yeah.
yes.
if you bring in an England or a France, you're selling out BC Place.
Yes.
Emphatically.
Yes. Yeah.
54,000 people there. That's two games for the price of one.
Exactly. And that's a big reason why the Federation wanted to come to Vancouver this month to play this Nations League game as well as to, at least initially have a friendly here because, well, for two reasons, really. I mean, they realize that there's a big amount of support in Vancouver because if we look back even 5, 6, 7 years ago, guys, I remember when this team was still not getting a lot of fanfare. They got 20,000 people at BC Place to watch Honduras in World Cup qualifying. Yeah. They got 15,000, 16,000 to watch French Guyana in a Nations League qualifier. Now, it was a long weekend, but you could still make the argument, people went out of town, things like that, and they still got 15, 16K in the lower bowl at BC Place for what was a non-marquee opponent in a competition no one had ever really heard of. So they've always turned up for the national team. So the thought was we can get the support, we can reward the fans for their patience in terms of waiting for us throughout the entirety of World Cup qualifying, plus we can make big bucks from selling out BC Place and then add extra money to our coffers.
Vancouver and Edmonton have always supported this team. They have been good markets.
All national teams, women too.
National
Yes,
teams.
exactly.
They have been very good markets for the national team. See, you guys went England and France. I was wondering about Argentina and Brazil.
Yeah.
Coming on up, Neymar or Lionel Messi, man.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Either way, they're going to pack that stadium, regardless of the team they get. If it's like a top 10, 15
A
nation.
reasonable, foe. Yeah.
Well, that's it. I mean, any of those four that we mentioned, I think, turns into 40, 50,000 at BC Place for sure.
I think the schedule just opened up for the Azuri too.
Yeah.
Oh,
Doesn't have to be a
you have
current
to go
World
there,
Cup team, does it?
That's right. Peter, marvelous stuff. Thank you for this. Thanks for visiting the Go-Goat Sports Studio.
Thank you, guys.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
Good
Appreciate
reporting.
it.